From Renaissance Coliseum, the Bradley Basketball pregame show is back. Joey Wright alongside Larry Larson and Mitch Kaminsky. Guys, great to have you back, socially distanced, for what really isn't a pregame show, Larry, as we talked about before we came on. It's a preseason show. Season starts in just over a month.
Yes, it is. And I know we're all excited, and even though we've got a ways to go, I think we've all kind of been counting down the days until November 25th since the season ended abruptly in March.
It really is a shame the season got pushed back, because when you look at some of the guys they have returning and some of the new faces they've added, this is one of the more exciting Braves rosters we've had in some time, which is saying something because they just won back-to-back MVC titles. So I think the best is still yet to come for this team.
They'll try for the three-peat here starting in November, and another Illinois team has a bit of a history with three-peats in basketball. Don't want to make those comparisons quite yet, but we'll see. Jordan did start his career at Carver Arena. Preseason game, if you watch the documentary, which in the time since the season ended and now was that was our basketball fix for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. That was a lot of fun to watch, and I think there were a lot of Bradley mentions in there.
Yeah, Jerry Krause, Bradley alum on there, and of course Jordan in Peoria. But we don't need to get into that.
Certainly not. Over the course of the next few minutes, we'll talk about who's back for Bradley basketball, who's new for Bradley basketball, how they might start when the season comes around in November, and who they'll play. And Larry, let's dive right into it. Some turnover on the roster this year, for sure, but they bring back a lot of exciting faces, headlined by Elijah Childs.
Yeah, certainly. Elijah Childs is the headliner of that returning group, and there are big shoes to fill. Darrell Brown graduated, one of the best players in recent history for Bradley basketball. Nate Cannell, also a big piece, was a sixth man for a long time. He's a staple of the starting lineup last year. Koch Barr also graduated. So there's really a shoe to fill in every spot in the lineup. You got the 1, you got the 3, you got the 5. So there are going to be some guys that need to step up, and I think Elijah Childs is one of those guys. He's always been a vocal leader. In terms of leadership, I think the Braves are well covered in that department. But in terms of scoring, you're going to need guys like Ville Tavanainen, Elijah Childs, Ari Boya to step up to fill the shoes of the graduated seniors. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but it could be an adjustment.
Yeah, they do have some good scoring depth this year, but I think this is the first year, as you alluded to, that Elijah Childs is going to be the go-to guy this year. Darrell's not on the team anymore, and he took most of the fourth quarter shots. So Elijah's really going to have to not necessarily step up, but he's going to have a lot more pressure on him. His scoring numbers have gone up every season since he's been here. He almost averaged 15 a game last year, and I think, like I said, because now he's the go-to guy, those numbers are just going to improve. He said his surgically repaired hand feels a lot better, and he also said this offseason that he feels more explosive than ever coming into this year. So watch out the rest of the Valley if that is the case.
And that's one thing about this group is they're always motivated to get better. They've won back-to-back Valley titles, but they didn't get their chance to go to March Madness, and I think they want that again. They know that they could make some trouble if they get the right matchup. So I think they want to get back to March Madness, and why wouldn't they? And, going off Elijah Childs a little bit, I think if he has a good season, he could get picked up on some national radars. If he really has a good Valley season, has a good non-conference season, if Bradley wins some games, he could find himself on second-team All-American or possibly third-team All-American if he really has a good year.
Certainly. And Larry, you and I actually, we sat down with Dave Snell not too long after the season ended. It was right after all that happened in March. He brought up a good point that I want to mention now. Bradley basketball, they got to go out in March raising a trophy. So, that's the last memory these guys have. And, of course, you want to go to the big dance. You want to play in March Madness. But I think the fact that they got to end on that high note, if anything, that gives the returners a little bit of a boost here as we get into November and the season beyond.
Yeah, and usually only one team gets to end their season with a victory, and that's the national champion. But Bradley was one of, I'd guess, 5, 6, 7 teams, if that, to end their season with a victory. So it certainly is on a high note. And talking to the players after the season ended, that was definitely the vibe.
Oh, and it gives this team championship pedigree. They know how to win. They've been through it before. So when they go through the war this year, trying to run it back for a three-peat, experience is going to be on their side, which is always a big factor.
Absolutely. And we talk about those returners, Elijah Childs, Jashawn Henry, the whole cast of characters there. A lot of newcomers for Bradley. Some guys that were in the program last year, redshirted, they'll get the chance to play now. Some newcomers. Sean East transfers in this year. But who can we look for, Larry and Mitch, to step up from that new crop this year? Whether it's Terry Nolan, Tino, as they like to call him, Sean East, one of the freshmen. Who are we looking at?
I'm looking at Sean East, a transfer from UMass, is going to be a sophomore this year, immediately eligible. That's a huge pickup for Brian Wardle. We're talking about the shoes to fill at the one. Sean East is a true point guard, averaged 4.9 assists last year at UMass, and I think he could slide right into the starting lineup, possibly. He's also a guy who can fill it up like Darrell did. He scored 29 points. That was his game high last year for UMass, so he can fill it up. He can also distribute. And on this year's team, he's probably going to be that distributor. There's a lot of guys who can really score, and then later down the road in his career, he might be the guy who can really fill up the bucket. I've got my eyes on him. I've got my eyes on Terry Nolan. I know a lot of people in the program are impressed with him and his prowess and his vocal leadership. Even though he did not play last year, he's a voice on the team that people look to.
The one guy I really like this year, and he kind of flies under the radar, he's an incoming freshman, is Darius Hannah. Now, he's probably not going to be the big impact guy. He's going to be more of a depth player, but he was the number 6 recruit in the state of Wisconsin. He averaged 15 points a game and 12 boards as a sophomore. Then he tore his ACL. He came back his senior season, and he just got better. He averaged 17 and then 11 with 3 blocks a game. So this is a guy, he might need to bulk up a little bit. He's 6'8", 190. He already added 15 pounds. He hits the weight room a little bit more, try and get up to 200. That's going to help him. But I like the guy's scoring, the fact that he came back from an ACL injury like that and just got better. I think this is another lengthy piece that when Elijah Childs eventually is gone, he's going to step up and fill that role and forward, and I think he could be a nice weapon this year if they need another scoring option off the bench.
It's been a big freshman recruiting class for Brian Wardle. Another guy that I've got my eyes on as an incoming freshman is Jason Kent. He's a guy who's played a lot of high-level basketball, played AAU at a very high level, Mac Irvin Fire, a team that plays on the Nike Eyeball circuit, and went to Peach Jam in Florida, in Georgia, and they play a lot of high-level teams there. So, maybe he wasn't the biggest scorer on that team, but he's played some very high-level basketball. And the more you have that experience, especially from your freshman, the better. And I think he could get some minutes this year as well.
Sean East, of course, the UMass product. Bradley's hoping he's the best player to come out of Massachusetts since Marcus Camby. But, guys, one guy I've got my eye on, Connor Linke from St. Charles North. I had the fortune of seeing him play last year against Peoria Notre Dame right here in town. Didn't have the best game that afternoon, but there's a lot of optimism that even he, as an incoming freshman, can step up and make a big impact, if not this year, perhaps next year, the year beyond.
Yeah, that's one thing that I noticed. The roster's filling out in that 4 or 5 spot. Whereas, you had Koch Barr and Ari Boya last year. Now you've got more options. You've got Ari Boya, you've got Connor Linke, you've got, I'm drawing a blank, Rink Moose, who might play this year, and coming off an injury. I think he could really be a big piece. He can shoot the 3, he can really play in the post. So Wardle's got a little more options than he has in the past for that 5.
Yeah, the forwards have gotten a lot deeper and a little bit more athletic now that they have a whole lot of more options there. So that is nice. And in the guard play, you said we're going to add Terry Nolan this year and Sean East. So they have big shoes to fill with Darrell Brown, but I think they'll be able to fill in nicely, I should say.
That's definitely a theme this year is depth, Joey. And I think somebody's going to have to redshirt. I'm not going to speculate as to who that may be. But there are a lot of guys on this roster. Yeah. There's going to be some guys who are very deep bench guys, and that's one thing that Brian Wardle preaches is embrace your role, know your role, and be a star in your role. And I think that's going to be key for a lot of players because there are going to be some games, some guys are going to get banged up, and maybe the deep bench guy is going to get a lot of big minutes. We saw that a little bit last year. We had guys step up at seemingly random times when, you had Darrell Brown injured, you had Elijah Childs injured. One thing I was looking at last year, I forgot that Elijah Childs and Darrell Brown were injured in the same game and couldn't play against Illinois State. What did the Braves do? They still came out and won the big game at home. So I think if the Braves can continue that focus and just focus on team first, know your role, I think things will work out pretty well.
Yeah, they really do have layers of good players, which is always a luxury to have, and I do not envy Coach Wardle's decision on who to redshirt this year because when you're looking at that roster, it's like, wow. That's tough. I think you got to put him in. You got to put him in. So a lot of big decisions coming up.
Absolutely. And speaking of big decisions, guys, don't want to spend a ton of time on this. It's just some speculative fun. But your quick starting fives, how might that starting five look when Brian Mortal sets his lineup on what we believe to be November 25th?
Oh, man. Well, for me, I think Coach Worrell's got a lot of options. We've talked about options these last few minutes, but I think that's going to be reflected in the starting lineup. I don't think we're going to have one consistent group throughout the year. I think you're going to have Elijah Childs locked in at the 4 or maybe even 5 spot at times, but he's always going to be in the starting lineup. Daniel Kingsby, probably also going to be in the starting lineup, started at the 2 last year. I think this team is going to have a quick lineup, and they're going to have a bigger lineup. I think their quick lineup is going to go like Daniel Kingsby at the 2, Sean East at the 1, Ville Tavanainen at the 3, Elijah Childs at the 4, and Rink Must at the 5. And I think their bigger lineup is going to be Kingsby, possibly East, maybe Terry Nolan at the 1, and then Ville at the 3, Eli at the 4, and Ari at the 5. Deshaun Henry, also a guy I've got my eyes on to get in the starting lineup.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you with Childs. I got Sean East starting at point guard, obviously. He's going to distribute, and he's a capable scorer. I got Terry Nolan Jr. as the 2. He was starting a lot at George Washington before he transferred over, so there's nothing new in the starting role there. Then I got Deshaun Henry at the 3. I like the fact that he brings a lot of energy. He had 75 offensive rebounds last year, which is always nice to have. Gives up some athleticism. Then I have Childs at the 4 and Boya at the 5 to kind of be like the board man there. Ville I have coming off the bench as the 6th man. And I also kind of like Kevin McAdoo to somewhat get in that rotation as well. So I also like the shooting depth they have this year, too. Outside shooting's been somewhat of a problem the past couple of years. I mean, that's not really their game, but they have some guys that are very capable shooters this year. Nolan was averaging close to 34% before he transferred over, and Ville, obviously, we know what he can do from beyond the arc, too.
The shooting depth's going to be crazy. I mean, this team can really spread the floor with all positions. Now that you've got Rink Must healthy, he can splash them from deep. A big man at the 5 who can shoot threes. Oh, man, it's going to be tough to really lock down this lineup no matter really who's playing.
And McAdoo, who I mentioned, he was second on his team in Eastern Michigan with 43 pointers before he transferred over as well, so another shooter to watch.
And you mentioned that, Larry. People have really touted Rink's shooting ability, so I'm excited to see that if we get a chance to look at that this fall. A season that, again, we believe to start November 25th. Bradley right now tentatively scheduled for a multi-team event with Xavier, Toledo, and Oakland. That's going to be a great kickoff to the event. The schedule mostly solidified right now, we believe. Still some holes, still some things we're figuring out. But just to start things off, guys, that's a great event for Bradley to play in.
Oh, it really is. I think it's a lot better than the event they originally had scheduled. So whenever you can get a Big East team on the schedule and possibly a Quadrant 1 team in Xavier to start the season, that's a great matchup. And Toledo, a good mid-major, as well as Oakland, should be winnable games for the Braves, honestly.
Yeah, I agree, and it definitely helps their national ranking after that when you're playing a big team like that. In years past, the Braves, their out-of-conference schedule hasn't been the toughest. I know they tried to play Memphis last year, and that was no fault of their own. They just didn't turn out to be as good as everyone thought initially. But Xavier was pretty good last year, Big East school, some big names in there. So it's a winnable tournament, and that's going to help their rankings nationally.
And that's one thing with COVID this year. With the NCAA pushing back the start date of the season, schedules were kind of blown up. A lot of teams had their November schedule set. Now that the NCAA pushed back the start date nearly a month, teams had to scramble to find matchups. Teams looked local, teams looked national for these multi-team bubble events. And Bradley got in a good one with a high major team, and that's really what you want. And possibly Bradley can come out with a few more of those matchups, just standalone games. So I think that's going to be something to watch. Obviously, I've heard they've still got Mizzou on the schedule. Could be a Quadrant 1 SEC opponent. That's big. So the more games you can get like that, the better. And I think COVID, of course, we say this with a grain of salt because it really doesn't benefit anybody. But in terms of scheduling, it could really benefit mid-majors like Bradley.
One thing it's impacted every team, but one thing where the COVID, I think, is really going to impact the Braves is how many fans are let in Carver Arena, because they were pretty good at home last year. There was a couple games that it looked like they had no business winning that they hung around in and made it close, if not pulled them out. They were excellent at home. So with no fans in there, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. However, all the other teams will probably have to deal with it as well. So we'll see how that develops as the season moves along.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mitch, because it's always so hard to win on the road in the Valley. And I think something that we've seen in the NBA bubble, not to compare the Missouri Valley to the NBA, but taking the fans out of the equation really shows just flat out who's the better basketball team. You're not going to have as much luck. You're not going to have the home court advantage factor. So people always talk about, oh, it's so hard to win on the road in the Valley no matter what team you are. You take fans out of the equation, I think the better basketball team who shows up that day has a better chance to win. So, that could play in Bradley's advantage when they go on the road. It could play against Bradley at home. So it's going to be really something to watch.
On the road, it will help because Bradley's a relatively young team. They only have 2 seniors on the roster, and some of the guys that have transferred over, they haven't played in a year. And with COVID, it's been a while since a lot of these guys have played competitive games in general. So when you're on the road, that's going to help when you don't have to deal with an opposing crowd. You can kind of calm down. If you miss a shot, you're not going to have to worry about getting heckled or anything. So I think that could play to their advantage on the road.
It'll be an interesting trend to follow across, the Valley, but even college basketball in general. How does Duke fare without the Cameron Crazies?
Yeah.
Or, you look at all these great environments throughout college basketball. A lot of them in the Valley. Just across the board, though, we'll have to see how it all plays out. And then, guys, I want to talk about just a little bit here before we wrap it up. It was announced last week that Missouri Valley Conference Commissioner Doug Elgin, he's calling it a career at the end of the season. He will retire, and I think we all want to congratulate Doug Elgin on what has been a phenomenal career, 30-plus years, I believe.
33,
yep. 33 with the Missouri Valley Conference.
Longest tenured commissioner in the NCAA at this point. What a career he's had. He's really elevated the Valley to a national level. I mean, they were good when Doug Elgin took over, but he really kind of kept them in the national spotlight. And it got tough when Wichita State and Creighton left. He's done a lot of big things for the Missouri Valley, replacing those teams. He replaced one of those teams with a future Final Four team. Picked Loyola to join the conference, and they did not disappoint Mr. Elgin, to say the least. And he moved the Missouri Valley Conference tournament to St. Louis, which I think is really the hallmark accomplishment for the commissioner, and that really elevated the tournament to a national level. I know when I talk to my friends who go to Big Ten schools, they're like, oh yeah, Arch Madness, dude. I'm watching that this weekend. I don't think that's possible if it's not on a, national arena, so to speak, at the Enterprise Center or a national stage with really an iconic name in Arch Madness.
Yeah, the longevity has been incredible. He's only the 9th commissioner of the Missouri Valley Conference's history, and the conference was founded in 1907, so that just goes to show they've had some solid leadership there that have been around a long time. Going along with the tournament, too, you got the deal with CBS as well as ESPN3 and ESPN+, which is huge for the conference. It's almost made him a national brand, and he's highly respected by all of his peers. If you look at David Harris, University of Northern Iowa's athletic director, he was quoted in an article in the Gazette saying, under Doug's leadership, the MVC blossomed into a national brand and a key player on the NCAA stage. And I mean, that's all you need to know. That's very high praise from his peers.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned how Doug Elgin replaced Creighton, Loyola, or Creighton and Wichita State, with Loyola and then Valparaiso later on. But Creighton and Wichita State, it's also a testament to the Missouri Valley Conference that they were able to grow into those powerhouses and leave for conferences of just a slightly higher competition and stature because of the conference, and just that the conference was able to become that under Elgin.
Yes, certainly, and it's unfortunate that they did leave because the conference was a lot of fun those years. Arch Madness packed every year with fans from Nebraska and Kansas. I forgot where Wichita State was for a little bit. We can probably cut that, but it was a lot of fun and very competitive, and it still is. And Mitch talked about longevity. That really speaks to that.
And it's going to be tough for the person that's coming in after this whole pandemic, but I think he's put whoever his replacement is in the best position possible with the way the conference has been set up. So they should be in good hands moving forward.
I would certainly think so. Guys, that's about all the time we have here, the Bradley Basketball pregame show, preseason edition, if you will. Any final thoughts? As we record this, we've still got a little bit over a month until we get to that November 25th date. Certainly a lot to talk about in the weeks leading up to the season, but we'll leave our viewers with just one quick final thought.
Well, Joey, I'm really excited. Today we really focused on this Bradley team. I think we're going to do another show looking at the Valley and the schedule as a whole once all that comes out. But I think this roster is as talented as Brian Wardle has had here in his Bradley tenure. I mean, you look up and down the roster, we've touched on it throughout the show. It is deep. You could even use the word stacked. I'm glad I don't have to set the starting lineup. I'm glad I don't have to pick who's redshirting because there is so much talent on this roster.
Absolutely. I think this is an exciting team. They got championship experience. They're still hungry. They haven't played in a while. They're robbed of an NCAA tournament. So either get on the train or get off the tracks because the big red train's coming, baby.
The big red train, coming indeed. Again, we believe the season will start on November 25th. So that'll do it for the first edition of the Bradley Basketball pregame show. For Mitch Kaminsky and Larry Larson, I'm Joey Wright. Thank you for tuning in, and go Braves.